better. So implementing this, now that we kind of have this improved method, what's our goal that's out there that's our destination, like when we are driving? Well, really, the part of this equation, because we need variables to tie these together. ROI is really what it comes down to, right? That's the purpose of all this, is return on investment for the company, right? There's people outside the company, the investors, and this trickles down. So ROI is a very important metric to keep within this. So we thought we had this. We actually had this. What we want is this, right? So I call this a methodology here that I think can help, and it's very easy to implement. Again, a lot of these are very easy steps you just do continuously. I call it the focus rotation methodology. So here's the idea. There's a few simple parts to it. And it's so simple that it's easy to look over. But again, it's like that steering thing, right? I mean, it's not hard to say, do that. It's all the difference in the world. So the idea here is the team as a whole holds the individual goals together at specific points in time. So the way this gets implemented is you will have a specific focus goal for, let's say, a week. So if you had 4 goals, and what you would do is you'd rotate them where each goal is a focus for that week. So let's say cost point is the focus for this week. The way that gets implemented and brought in the focus is during the regular recurring meetings regarding that program, so steering meetings, we all know them. There's 2 or 3 that you have to go to, during the week. And the term cost points brought up at the beginning. We're like, everybody just reminder, cost points are focus for this week. That's it. That's all. You just say that and you go on with your meeting. At the end of the meeting, we say, OK, cost points are focus. What did we talk about that affects our cost point target? And what about our cost point target can affect what we've done? Well, now there'll be some specific actions and activities that will come out of that and be added on to the other action items of the list. And it's kept in focus. And the entire team has ownership of that at that point in time. So this continues. And then if we look at, let's say, a 4-week period, the whole team has held all the goals together. It's a very simple concept, but it does work. And it works well. And you can use this with even other things and challenges in the program. So now that we have our team, and we're getting our team and our goals all combined together, we have some other things we need to do to help keep it implemented. So we need transparency to all goals. You need to have things as simple as, imagine a 50-inch TV on the wall that was able to, in some kind of a graphical form or other metric, communicate what the goals are and where we are in relation to them, and the history of where we are in relation to them. That's very simple, but also will have a big effect, right? Think of that Gore-Tex, the Gore brand, right? That's some of what's happening each day from some of these things they've done. They are all holding it together, and they're all very aware of the actual product objectives. Cross-functional reinforcement, this is huge. This helps get away and break down some of those barriers by having this kind of check and balance system across the whole organization. Because if somebody is working on something that's a goal that's very associated to their discipline, but somebody else is accountable for making sure that's on track, they both have ownership for the success of it. And there's a lot of individual things that can be done to make that part of the process. Ownership is huge. Each team creates their own metrics. So the team will create their own metrics in reference to the product development plan. Here we are directly tied in to all of the goals. And all other teams need to review and agree on these metrics in advance so they have input and the ownership's transferred. So imagine these practices and things done in advance of a program. They don't take a lot of energy, but it's a huge difference between that looking down at the radio and driving and keeping your goal in mind. It does that simple difference between big steering corrections and a lot of small together. So if you look at business practices, decision making is one of the most poorly tracked program activities. It's really amazing. I mean, how many decisions are made even just weekly in a program? How do you go back when you're at a certain point knowing how you got there? People are trying to recall conversations like, oh yeah, I remember that. And it's not tracked at all. It's amazing. It's such an easy thing to track, but tracking decisions. Because it's a huge part of knowing where you are and where you're going is knowing where you've been. That's your trajectory. We're engineers. That's your momentum. I don't know if I haven't heard anybody laugh, so nobody read the bottom line on my slide yet, I guess, but I don't know. So I've talked a lot about this idea of metrics and how they can help with this process. So I just want to take a moment here for a detour. And obviously, it's another one of the cornerstones. But it's information graphics. There is so much amazing work done here that is used in so many other disciplines in product development, but really isn't used in engineering as much as it should be. And a lot of it makes sense that it's not because of intuitively how we communicate. But I think that as an entire discipline and community of engineers, I think we do need to consider some of this transformation for communication. And it will have a great effect as to how other parts of programs interact with us. Information graphics. If you go back to the origins of humans communicating, what was it? It was graphical, right? That's how our mind's structured. If you think about how our mind is built and how we think about things, it's very pictorial. We were developed in a lot of ways for mapping, right? That was one of our most important survival skills, is not written documentation. It was mapping large areas and remembering it. We're very graphical like that. That was the fundamental component of most of our communication. Now, with the advent of modern technologies, there's such amazing efficiency in word and number communication that, of course, that has become a very powerful way to document things and record them. But it's not, on its own, is not a great way to communicate to other people. So a lot of this has been captured in this concept of information graphics, and there's a lot of amazing people like Tufte and some others that have done really good work in this area. And it's not new, and in so many other parts of other industries and technologies and disciplines it's used. And this is considered one of the most famous information graphics of all time, and so I see some people nodding, they're familiar with it. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about it and show how powerful this is and what's important and makes something an information graphic. This was created by Charles Menard in 1869. It's in French, which doesn't limit at all the information you can pull from this. And what it's covering is Napoleon's Russian campaign in 1812. And this is started in Lithuania, and his idea was to take over Moscow. So a good information graphic is able to be read at multiple levels. Any good information graphic, I should be able to be walking past it in a hallway, glance at it for 5 seconds, take away an important piece of information, and keep going. I should also be able to, in any good information graphic, have it support a 3-hour debate with somebody else. It has to be able to do both those things and all the resolutions in between. And you will see in a second why this is one of the most famous ones that's been created, because it does that perfectly. So unfortunately, you're a little far away from it, and some of the numbers are smaller. This is anticipated to be shown on a piece of paper. But you see two things here first, right? You see this tan line it appears to be going that way. It's getting smaller, and you see a black line coming back. And this is a map. This is where they started. That's Moscow. And there's even a scale of kilometers there, so you realize that it's actually to scale with regard to itself. And there's numbers on the outside of here. This is 400,000. Down here is 10,000. You know, in the center section, 2,000. And you start to realize pretty quickly, what is this? If this is a military campaign, what do you think these numbers are? And what do you think these widths are that clearly go along with the numbers? It's the number of troops that are in the campaign. How many people are in there? So he started with 400,000, you can see right away. And you start to realize that this is direction. That's going in, and that's coming back. And here's 10,000. So we can stop there, and you can realize it didn't really go well at all. It went very badly. That's my walking past it in the hallway, and like, wow, Napoleon, like, we're not hiring him to do our next military campaign. This guy's bad. So now, what if you were two historians who wanted to have a multiple-hour debate about this and about strategy and what people were thinking? All that information to support that is here, too, as well. So we can look at this, and we see that the reductions in population happen in notches, right, initially. And it's by geographic location. Those are battles, obviously, right? You have a ton of people die in one spot. It's a battle, right? But then something weird happens here. That stops. but the line now is linearly reducing, dramatically too. And that means that they're dying from something else. Well, that's the exact point the Russians changed their strategy. The Russians came up and were fighting them and met them to fight them. But Napoleon's army was known to be the greatest military army in the world. They had conquered all of Europe at this point, and Russia was just this last thing on their checkoff list to do, was to get Moscow. So the Russians changed their strategy here at that point. They decided to do a retreat, slash, and burn, and let the fact that they were Russians and the French weren't kill them, and that the Russians knew how to handle the cold and the territory better than the French. So what they did is they started a retreat, and also the Russians are hardcore people. Every town they went through, they burned to the ground, their own towns, made everybody evacuate, burned it to the ground, took all the supplies, like took jackets, took food, everything, because they knew that the French were planning that they couldn't have supply lines that supported them that far. They knew they were counting on basically just taking resource as they conquered. And if you notice here at the bottom, I'm sorry you can't see it clearly from so far away, but this is temperature. This bottom scale here is temperature. And these temperatures are no joke. To the far right is 0 degrees, and the lowest one here is -30, okay? And this is showing the marks of temperature. So you know that as far as time goes, even if you didn't know when it occurred, you know that when they were coming back, it was getting colder. So what happened too is Russia dragged it out so that it went deep into winter. They were expecting to pull this off in a short period of time. They dragged it out for months. This is the best part. I love this part over here. Russians evacuated Moscow. They got everybody out of Moscow. Again, they took all the jackets, all the food, they burned everything and let the French just walk in there. Napoleon was expecting this army and this surrender, and he got there and he's just like, where's everybody? Like, there was nobody there. And he's like, we got Moscow. And everyone's like, big deal. They're like, good for you, boss. And so they're all there. They're freezing to death. They didn't bring winter gear. They're starving. They're dying of disease. People are deserting. Napoleon's like, I guess we'll go home. Like, what was that? There's nothing to do. They were stuck in Moscow. So they started back, and the Russians just let the winter kill them. Now you see the notches again, but they're lined up with the temperature drops. Those are how many people were dying like in one night, right? And he comes all the way back, 10,000 guys left. So you can see, I went on, I'm not a historian, and I just know little few points about it. But you could imagine if you were to historians' debates, you could go on and on. I don't even read French. I didn't even read one word of that. So that's a good information graphic. It can capture that much information, and it's ready. It's ready to support any conversation. It's not a Pareto chart that just has one set of information. It can support any conversation on the topic. So all these things I talked about, teams collaborating, working together, getting information, focusing on goals. I thought about it. I'm like, there's probably a lot of simple ways to do it. So I kind of started playing around with it a little bit. And I wanted to kind of use this information graphic idea. And one thing that's important to acknowledge is that just like any other information graphic, it's entirely custom to that organization. Because picture if you asked my grandmother to cut her household budget, it'd be very different than mine, or somebody from a different country. They would do it a very different way. My grandmother ran her household very differently. Her and my grandfather took amazing vacations every year. I mean, they would go off to Morocco and then go to France the next year and whatever. But if I asked her to cut the food, she loved to cook, and she cooked everything from, she came from a different generation, and the Depression generation where they made everything from scratch. She would cook the most amazing meals, but she made it all from scratch ingredients. If I said you have to cut 10% of the food budget, she's like, what, you want me to buy flour? Like, what is she going to cut out of that? It's like flour, rice, sugar, salt. But vacation, she'd be like, all right, we'll go to Florida this year instead of Morocco or something, right? Like, to her, vacation was easy to cut. So again, different strategies. So this always has to be, this can't be a generic thing. It has to be very custom to not only the company and the organization, but each program. So let me describe some of the features that that are on here. So some of the important things are, in this case, I made ROI the central axis, because again, that's the central variable that revolves around all this and how these all communicate with each other. And this isn't just a graphic. This is actually a software tool that I've already developed. And I have a software engineer on my team. And we've come up with a way to graphically represent this. And I had some requirements before we created it. I can show you a demo later. is that one, it runs in a browser. Because nowadays, browsers, they can do amazing calculations and statistical work right in with HTML5 and things like D3 and Java right in the browser. This is of no value. Remember I said transparency, like computer screen on the wall? If you have to have the right software loaded or the right file loaded on your computer, where's the value, right? You're in the steering meeting and the executive asks a question and you're like, oh, all right, let me bring this up. Or he's like, instead he opens up his Google Chrome and hits the bookmark and this comes up. And you can actually grab things and move them. So you not only get to have the information you're looking for presented to you, you can even slide the date history and look back. Where have we been? What decisions did we make? You can then play with it and see how balancing resource works and affects the others because you've taken the time to make those equations that relate to each other. So you could have simple factors like the diameter indicates how much that item is stressing the budget, or proximity indicates how much that is going to affect schedule directly. And you can see your original goals in comparison. OK, our reliability, our program goal was at 80%. Looks like we're at 70% right now. So once we see our goals, we have our target, we see where we're at currently, and have an opportunity to play around with balancing, we have an easy way to communicate and support all those things that I advised. So you don't need anything special to create this tool. You could do it in PowerPoint on your own and sit down and figure out a graphic that works well. But of course, the more automation you bring into it, the more it supports the playing around with part, and the less of the architects of it you have to have present for the discussion. So it can support documenting people's strategies for things that they communicate to other people individually. It should be able to also support active conversations. And it should be something that is used with the entire team in discussion for a lot of those big points where people come together to communicate and talk about the program and its status. So we had our product plan that had all our goals we wanted in there. We used a method that kept us focused on it. We found a way to represent it and graphically communicate it, because if these goals are just left in a document, that's how they're easy to lose sight of. And in the end, hopefully we end up with a product that reflects all of those original goals. So these are some things that I hope you can bring back to your organization and think about. And they're really a lot of easy steps. It's really just about consciousness of this cycle that we end up in so many programs, and doing a few things differently. So those are some of the things that I've learned and thought about with regard to balancing reliability goals in product development. And it'd be great to hear any of your questions after the break. Oh, OK, wait. Wait a second. I'm not a cruel person, so I've shown you guys pictures of colored cakes. So these are cookies with color swirls in them. So I hope you enjoy them during the break. We have lunch later. But I just kind of felt like I showed you cake 5 times on the screen, right? I mean, it's just so. And they're color swirls, so you can think about all the goals too and everything. All right. So thanks very much, everybody. I'll throw this out there.
After eating, there will be questions, right?
Yeah, you can ask me questions with a mouthful of cookies. So all right. Thanks, everybody. We'll take a break and we'll come back later. Thanks.